So today, we're going to be talking about the Yuan Dynasty, perhaps one of the coolest dynastic eras. So today, we're going to be talking about the Yuan Dynasty, perhaps one of the coolest dynasty in Chinese dynastic era because it was ruled by the Mongols. But before we do that, I would like to talk about Genghis Khan, one of the most influential Mongols. And this was all before the Yuan Dynasty, by the way. So this was Genghis Khan. He was a Mongol. And the Mongols were all descendants of the Xiongnu, as I've mentioned before in the Han Dynasty video. So Genghis Khan really means universal ruler. Genghis Khan rose to unite tribes and he wanted to expand territory through alliances, but mostly through brutal warfare. So let's talk about Mongol society. Mongol society was really based on the horses, herding cattle, and hunting. Their empire was stretched from Eastern Europe to Korea and was the largest land empire the world has ever seen, even bigger than the Roman Empire. And this was a picture of the empire, but do note that China was already a part of the empire in this picture, but it was not actually a part of China under Genghis Khan's rule. That will be later in the Yuan Dynasty under Kublai Khan. So that was Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan. Yeah, they look really similar. So Kublai Khan conquered the southern Song of the Song dynasty. He established the Yuan dynasty, the first non-indigenous dynasty, or the non-native dynasty because it was conquered by the Mongols and not by the Chinese themselves. So that is the dynastic era timeline. The Yuan dynasty came after the Song dynasty and before the Ming dynasty. Kublai Khan divided empire into 4 pieces and it was ruled by descendants of Genghis Khan and his third generals. The Mongols were traditionally nomadic, but now they found themselves as rulers of a complex and advanced civilization, or China. So he knew that while the empire was won on horseback, it could not be governed on horseback. So how he ruled China. So the Mongols started to adopt Chinese ways politically and culturally. So really, the conquerors were becoming more Chinese instead of the Chinese becoming more like the conquerors. So they left traditional yurts and lived in palaces. This was a yurt, it's really like a tent. They became more bureaucratic to run the country. They employed a lot of different bureaucrats from all over the world. Although they did not farm because they saw farming as beneath them, they still appreciated the tax from the farmers. A capital in Beijing was built. They reinstated Confucianism into rituals and ceremonies, and do recall that Confucianism was the official state ideology of many dynasties. They also started to restore central and local government institutions and agencies. They moved away from keeping livestock to focusing on agriculture, and paper money returned. Paper money was already introduced before the Yuan dynasty, but they continued the tradition of paper money. They also developed a new social hierarchy. So they stopped their usual ways of ranking based on their horses. Now they divided people into clear ethnic groups and classes. The first were the Mongols, definitely. The second were the Mongols' allies, such as the Europeans and some Muslims from the Middle East and Central Asia, who were mostly traders. The third were the Han people of China, just like the normal Chinese. And the fourth were the Song people, and they were often discriminated against because they were the ones who were the last to be defeated. The foreigners were favored, and among one of them comes the most famous story of Marco Polo. So trade flourished with the increased use of Silk Road, and there was the exchange of ideas, goods, and culture from the Silk Road. And it was said that Marco Polo traveled along the Silk Road to get to China. So his travelogue was titled The Travels of Marco Polo. That was it. That is like the picture of China. It was said that he may have been a confidant of Kublai Khan. So in the Travels of Marco Polo, he described vivid images of China accurately, such as the Silk Road, dunes, and the thriving civilization. He also brought ideas back to Europe such as coal, paper money, and postal service that were not introduced in Europe just yet. However, there were a few inconsistencies because he exaggerated cultures and saying that men were cannibals, and also he failed to mention practices such as chopsticks, food binding, and the Great Wall of China. However, some of that could be easily countered because the Great Wall, most of what we see of the Great Wall today was from the Ming Dynasty. It was not restored yet. Whether or not Marco Polo made it to China, he definitely inspired the age of exploration and exploration in general through his travelogue, The Travels of Marco Polo. So, back to the Yuan Dynasty and the Chinese. What did the Chinese think of the Mongols? Well, unfortunately, Kublai Khan failed to unite the Chinese. Firstly, the Chinese still considered the Mongols to be foreign invaders, and they were unhappy with the social hierarchy as mentioned before. They resented the foreign rule and the influence of foreigners in the courts, and mixed marriages and movement between groups were forbidden. And all of this will eventually prompt the Chinese to rebel. So now let's take a look at some of the reasons for the fall of the Yuan Dynasty. So as we mentioned on the previous slide, it's got to do with Chinese resentment. And now they start to lose effectiveness as a fighting force. There was a period of the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongolian Peace, which, and because the Mongols had already fought so many wars and had conquered so much territories, there were no more wars to be fought, and so they lost effectiveness as a fighting force. They were also unable to put down many Chinese rebellions. So really, the Mongols became a victim of their own success. There was also economic issues. There were 2 failed invasions of Japan, and a divine wind, as the Japanese calls it, destroyed all of the Chinese fleets, and so a lot of the soldiers died. This was a huge financial cost, and the Mongols started to increase taxes, which really pissed the Chinese off, and so this also led to rebellions. So that was the divine wind. There was also inflation due to increased paper money printed, as mentioned before. So because of the inflation, prices were increased, and this really pissed the Chinese off as well. So all of this will eventually lead to the fall of the Yuan Dynasty, like many other dynasties as well, of these themes of economic issues and resentment from the common people. So some discussion questions. Was Genghis Khan's brutality justified? Because do recall that a lot of his territory taken was through brutal force. Did Marco Polo make it to China? Did the Mongols destroy Chinese civilization or improve China? And lastly, was Kublai Khan a success or a failure? And that'll be all for today. Thank you for listening.